In the last episode, we talked about the Hal and Falstaff scene as both a deposition and as a sort of self-examination, since Hal plays both himself and his father. Let's now actually look at the scene where King Henry IV examines his own son. The imagery here makes us think that Hotspur and the new conspirators, the new rebels, the new traitors may be correct. Henry IV does seem to be the smiling king. King Henry, I know not whether God will have it so for some displeasing service I have done. Is Henry that oblivious? Did he not just overthrow a king who saw himself as God's deputy on earth? That in his secret doom or judgment, out of my blood, think of the sacred blood, he'll breed revengement and a scourge for me. But thou dost in thy passages of life make me believe that thou art only marked for the hot vengeance and the rod of heaven to punish my misdreadings. He's a punishment for his bad deeds. Henry then will chastise Hal for being seen by others as being such a failure, being so bad. Had I so lavish of my presence been, in other words, seen publicly by everyone, so common hackneys, like an Uber car, like a Lyft driver, in the eyes of men so stale and cheap to vulgar company. This is funny because this is the exact same thing Falstaff said in their deposition scene, their examination scene. Falstaff, if then thou be son to me, here lies the point. Why, being son to me, art thou so pointed at? And then Henry begins to speak about himself and how he curried the favor of the Commons. And remember, the Commons is where Richard II was brought down. Had I so lavish of my presence been, so common hackneyed in the eyes of men, so stale and cheap to vulgar company, opinion that did help me to the crown, remember the opinion of the people, and that's doxa, opinion is not a good thing usually, had still kept loyal to possession. In other words, it would have still remained in Richard's hands if opinion hadn't helped him to the crown, and left me in reputeless banishment, a fellow of no mark nor likelihood. Remember, he would have lost his titles. By being seldom seen, I could not stir, but like a comet I was wondered at, that men could tell their children. Remember, he's not being seen, and so when he's seen, people say, this is he. Others would say, where? Which is Bolingbroke? And then I stole all courtesy from heaven. I became more courteous, more graceful than heaven, and dressed myself in such humility, I don't know what to say about that, that I did pluck allegiance from men's hearts, loud shouts and salutations from their mouths, even in the presence of the crowned king. We get the reverse perspective when we go and remember what Richard II said to his flatterers. Richard II, ourself and Bushy here, Bagot and Green, observed his courtship to the common people. They're talking about Henry Bolingbroke as he was leaving for exile. How he did seem to dive into their hearts with humble and familiar courtesy. I love that word seem. What reverence he did throw away on slaves, wooing poor craftsmen with the craft of soul. That word craft, right? It's the art of pretending to be interested in them. And patient underbearing of his fortune, as toward to banish their effects with him, meaning he was going to go into exile with their affections. Off goes his bonnet, his hat, to an oyster wench. A brace of draymen bid God speed him well, and had the tribute of his supple knee, with thanks, my countrymen, my loving friends, as were our England in reversion his. In other words, there was like a reversal of ownership, and England was going back to Henry, and he our subject's next degree in hope. All of this seems to back up the conspirators' objections about Henry IV. Like, it was all a show. He truly was a politician, as Hotspur says, biding his time until his chances came. And note also that Hal will become Henry IV, the more worthier king than his father. But he will also justify and identify his reign, like when he steps in to support his father's claims in the final act against the rebels. But that aspiration towards reform that seems to push Hal is marred by the same trickery or deceptiveness of his father. And we see this in his famous soliloquy. He seems to be speaking of the future until you take it apart and realize that the entire soliloquy is actually about the past, a past decision. At first, the impression is positive. On the surface, it sounds like a plan to get away from these terrible drinking friends of his, like Points and Falstaff and Bardolph, and to transform himself into somebody worthy of the crown. But when you look at it closely, it reads quite differently. Hal, I know you all, he's talking about his friends, and will a while uphold the unyoked humor of your idleness. I'll keep being a parting animal with you guys. Yet herein will I imitate the sun, who doth permit the base contagious clouds to smother up his beauty from the world. He'll be like the sun, allowing clouds on a cloudy day to cover him up. That when he please again to be himself, to be a full sun, being wanted, in other words, not being there, he may be more wondered at by breaking through the foul and ugly mists of vapors that did seem to strangle him. Seems is the key word. You hear the word sun and you immediately think of Richard II. Does the sun clarify the sin? But what bothers me the most about the soliloquy is that he's playing at being the prodigal son. He is the prodigal son who is aware that once he returns home, he will be marveled and glorified. And isn't that the very fear of the son who stays at home and helps his father? Luckily here, the younger son, John of Lancaster, does not seem to be bothered at all by this and just continues on working with the council and attending war parties and fights. So when this loose behavior I throw off and pay the debt I never promised, by how much better than my word I am, by so much shall I falsify men's hopes. You understand what he's saying, right? He's no longer having any fun. All that joy, all that drinking, all that partying has become common. It's joyless. But at the same time, I'd understand that other comment he makes. It seems almost hostile. Shouldn't there be some expectations that as the eldest son, as the prince, that he will be good? That he's better than his word? And what about this comment about hopes? This statement, hostile statement that everyone is hoping he'll fail. He's promised failure, hasn't he? That's why Henry says in the court that everyone has prophesied his fall, but he'll show them. And like bright metal on a sullen ground, my reformation glittering over my fault shall show more goodly and attract more eyes than that which hath no foil to set it off. Also offend to make offense a skill, redeeming time, when men think least I will. Those couplets remind you of the sonnet, don't they? He's sounding like Henry IV, isn't he? Who won by rareness. He'll win them over by the contrast. Like the way if you go to a jeweler, how gold rings are placed on black velvet. That's done because the contrast between the black and the gold makes the gold more attractive. So there's need for a foil, something that serves as a contrast to call attention to better qualities. So the black velvet is the foil to the gold. Hal's foil is Falstaff, right? Every hero needs a foil. Isn't that what Marvel comics are all about? Better to compare Superman is to have a villain, or Batman, or whoever other man you can think of. Hal's sins, his erratic behavior, hanging out with Falstaff, will be that foil. And here's the part that's disturbing. It's almost instrumental. It's almost useful. His offenses, his sins, will be used as a skill or art to achieve what he wants. But what does he want? That's the question. Is it moral reform? Or is it just fatigue and joylessness with all the drinking and partying? Or is it ambition? We're not sure. In some ways, Hal at this point is very much like his father in Richard II. But we'll see how all this plays out in the next play. As we'll see in Henry II Part 2, playing the prodigal son is a hard thing to do.
Alright guys, don't forget to like and subscribe and ring that notification bell.